Sign here, Evelyn. Your mother is gone, and so is this marriage. Adrian Calloway's voice landed with terrifying calm, almost gentle, as though he were discussing dinner reservations instead of ending 12 years of love beside a polished oak casket. For one impossible second, Evelyn Harper wondered if grief had distorted reality. Maybe exhaustion had blurred the words. Maybe the sleepless nights beside her mother's hospice bed had finally caught up with her. Then she looked down. The divorce papers were real. The silver fountain pen resting on top of them was real. The rain tapping softly against the stained glass windows of St. Andrew's Church was painfully real. And the tiny life growing beneath her black funeral dress reminded her that none of this could possibly be a nightmare. It was happening. Stay with this story, because what happened inside that quiet church would become the beginning of a secret that no one, not even the man asking for her signature, could have imagined. 5 minutes earlier, before the mourners had gathered around Margaret Harper's casket for one final prayer, a phone hidden inside Evelyn's purse had vibrated exactly once. She never answered it. She couldn't. She was saying goodbye to the only parent she had left. She had no way of knowing that a single voicemail waiting silently on that phone had already changed her future forever. The church smelled of lilies, old wood, and rain-soaked coats. Soft organ music floated through the sanctuary, wrapping itself around whispered condolences and quiet sobs. Friends from Margaret's years as an art professor filled the pews, sharing stories about the woman who had inspired generations of students to see beauty where everyone else saw ordinary life. Evelyn stood beside the casket with one hand resting gently over her 6-month pregnancy, trying to breathe through the crushing weight pressing against her chest. She had spent months preparing herself to lose her mother. What she had never prepared for was losing her husband on the very same afternoon. Adrian adjusted the cuff of his expensive charcoal suit without looking toward the casket. His expression remained perfectly composed, the polished face of a millionaire real estate executive accustomed to closing difficult deals. To him, timing was everything. Delays cost money. Emotions complicated negotiations. Even grief seemed like an inconvenience that should be scheduled between meetings. The attorneys already finalized everything, he said quietly. It'll be easier if we don't drag this out. Evelyn stared at him, searching for even the smallest trace of hesitation. The man standing beside her looked exactly like the one she'd married. The same gray eyes, the same confident posture, the same wedding band still resting on his finger. Yet somehow, he felt like a complete stranger. Across the room, several guests pretended not to notice the documents in Adrian's hands. Others noticed everything and politely looked away. Funerals had a strange way of exposing truths people usually hid behind polished smiles and expensive clothes. Evelyn's fingers trembled, not from anger, but from disbelief. "You couldn't wait until tomorrow?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Adrian finally met her eyes. Tomorrow changes nothing. He believed those words with absolute certainty. He believed she was walking away with little more than memories, a baby on the way, and a life that depended entirely on whatever settlement his lawyers had approved. What Adrian didn't know was that while he stood calculating what he was about to lose, someone else had already calculated what Evelyn was about to inherit. And somewhere inside a voicemail she still hadn't heard, a family secret worth $900 million waited in complete silence. Evelyn did not reach for the pen. Instead, she folded both hands over the gentle curve beneath her black dress, feeling the faint flutter that reminded her she was no longer making decisions for herself alone. The silence between her and Adrian stretched until it almost became louder than the organ music echoing through the church. Finally, she looked at him with eyes that no longer begged for explanations. They simply searched for the truth. "Was all of this already planned before my mother passed away?" she asked quietly. Adrian exhaled through his nose, avoiding the question with the polished composure that had made investors trust him for years. "It has been over for a long time, Evelyn. You know that." She nodded once. Deep inside, she had known. The late nights labeled as business dinners. Weekend conferences that somehow never produced photographs. Phone calls answered outside the house. Conversations ending the moment she entered the room. None of those moments alone had proved anything. Together, they formed a picture she had refused to see because love often edits reality into something easier to survive. Margaret Harper had noticed it long before her daughter did. 3 months earlier, During one of her final afternoons at home, she had watched Adrian leave without saying goodbye. After the front door closed, Margaret had smiled sadly from her favorite chair beside the window. "Your heart always gives people one chance more than they deserve," she had whispered. Evelyn remembered laughing softly, insisting Adrian was simply overwhelmed with work. Margaret never argued. She only squeezed her daughter's hand. "Promise me something. Anything. When life finally shows you who deserves your kindness, believe it." At the time, Evelyn thought her mother was speaking about grief. Now those words echoed through her mind with unsettling clarity. The funeral service continued as relatives lined up to place white roses beside the casket. Margaret had spent 40 years teaching art history at a small university, yet the number of former students filling the sanctuary surprised everyone. Some had traveled hundreds of miles just to say goodbye. They spoke about the professor who stayed after class to help struggling freshmen, who secretly paid tuition for students who could not afford another semester, who believed talent mattered more than privilege. Looking around the room, Evelyn realized something that made her chest tighten. Her mother had quietly changed hundreds of lives, yet she herself had lived so modestly that most people assumed she owned almost nothing. Adrian checked his watch. The gesture was small, almost invisible, but Evelyn caught it. Even now, while people celebrated the woman who had devoted her life to others, his attention remained somewhere else. Meetings, contracts, deadlines, numbers. He leaned closer one final time. "My attorney will send another copy if you need more time. I would rather handle this privately before the media notices." The media, of course. His reputation, his company, his carefully crafted public image. Evelyn almost smiled, although there was no joy behind it. 12 years together, and somehow the headlines mattered more than the family they had built. She quietly folded the documents without signing them and slipped them back into the envelope. "Not today," she said. Adrian studied her expression, perhaps expecting tears or anger. Instead, he found something far more unsettling. Calm. Genuine calm. It was the kind of silence that appeared only after every illusion had already fallen apart. As the final hymn ended, mourners slowly stepped outside into the cool afternoon rain. Black umbrellas opened across the churchyard like blooming flowers beneath gray skies. Evelyn remained beside her mother's casket for one last moment before reaching into her purse to silence the forgotten phone that had vibrated earlier. The screen displayed one missed call and one unheard voicemail from Nathan Brooks, the family's attorney. Beneath his name appeared a single message that made her heartbeat pause. "Please listen immediately. Your mother instructed me to contact you the moment the service began. Everything has changed." The message sat on Evelyn's screen for several long seconds before she found the strength to press play. Nathan Brooks's familiar voice filled the quiet church, calm and deliberate, carrying the steady confidence that had comforted her family for nearly 20 years. "Evelyn, if you are hearing this, then Margaret's wishes have been honored exactly as she instructed. She asked me not to contact you until her funeral had officially begun because she wanted you to spend your final moments as her daughter, not as her legal heir. Please do not leave town. Come directly to my office. There are documents that must be signed today, and there is something your mother spent 30 years protecting." The voicemail ended. Evelyn listened again, then a third time. 30 years protecting what? Before she could gather another thought, her phone rang once more. Nathan himself was calling. She answered immediately. "Evelyn, where are you?" "I am still outside the church." "Good. Please do not discuss this with anyone, especially Adrian. I need you at my office within the hour." "Nathan, what is happening?" There was a brief pause on the other end before he answered. "Your mother wanted you to hear everything in person. Trust me just a little longer." The line disconnected. Evelyn lowered the phone slowly, her reflection faintly visible against the dark screen. For the first time all afternoon, curiosity interrupted grief. Margaret had never enjoyed surprises. She planned everything with quiet precision, from family birthdays to holiday dinners. If she had orchestrated this sequence so carefully, there had to be a reason. Behind her, the funeral guests gradually dispersed across the wet church parking lot. Cars started one by one, windshield wipers brushing away the steady rain. Adrian stood beside his black luxury sedan speaking into a wireless headset, already immersed in another business conversation. He glanced toward Evelyn only once. offering the brief professional nod one executive might give another after concluding a difficult negotiation. Then he climbed into the driver's seat and pulled away without another word. She watched the car disappear beyond the iron gates, surprised by how little she felt. The heartbreak she had feared never arrived. Instead, an unfamiliar emptiness settled inside her, followed by something quieter. Relief. Perhaps the marriage had ended long before either of them admitted it. A gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Harper." She turned to find Helen Morris, one of Margaret's oldest friends, standing beneath a navy umbrella. The elderly woman embraced Evelyn warmly before reaching into her handbag. "Your mother asked me to give you this after the service." It was a small ivory envelope sealed with dark blue wax bearing an elegant letter H. Evelyn recognized the seal immediately. It had appeared on every birthday card Margaret had ever written, though she had never explained its meaning. "Did she tell you what it is?" Evelyn asked softly. Helen smiled with tears in her eyes. "Only that when you finally understood the seal, you would understand her." Before Evelyn could ask another question, Helen squeezed her hand and quietly walked away. The envelope felt unexpectedly heavy despite its size. She resisted the urge to open it immediately. Nathan's message echoed in her mind. "There are documents that must be signed today. There is something your mother spent 30 years protecting." 30 years. Longer than Evelyn had been alive. What secret could possibly remain hidden for 3 decades without a single mistake? She carefully placed the envelope inside her purse and walked toward her modest silver SUV. As she settled behind the steering wheel, another memory surfaced from just 2 weeks earlier. Margaret had been sitting beside the hospital window, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of gold. Without warning, she had looked at Evelyn and asked, "Have you ever wondered why I insisted we never sell your grandfather's old house?" Evelyn had laughed gently. "Because you loved it." Margaret had smiled in that mysterious way mothers sometimes did when they knew tomorrow's answer but refused to spoil today's question. "That is part of the reason," she had replied. "The other part is waiting for you." At the time, Evelyn assumed the comment belonged to one of the countless sentimental conversations that often happen near the end of life. Now every forgotten sentence seemed to carry hidden meaning. She started the engine, unaware that the road ahead would lead not only to Nathan's office, but to a truth capable of rewriting everything she had ever believed about her family. The offices of Brooks and Holloway occupied the top floor of a quiet brick building overlooking the river, far removed from the gleaming glass towers where Adrian preferred to conduct business. Evelyn had visited only a handful of times over the years, usually to sign routine family documents that Margaret insisted should always be handled by people she trusted rather than firms with impressive advertisements. As the elevator doors opened, Nathan Brooks was already waiting in the reception area. He looked older than she remembered, his silver hair slightly more pronounced, his warm smile softened by the weight of the day. Without saying a word, he stepped forward and embraced her like an uncle welcoming family home. "I am so sorry about your mother," he said gently. Evelyn managed a quiet thank you before following him through a long hallway lined with framed black and white photographs. Most depicted historic buildings, old families, and landscapes from another era. One photograph stopped her in her tracks. It showed her mother standing beside an elegant gentleman outside a massive stone estate. Margaret looked no older than 30. The man beside her wore a tailored navy suit and carried himself with quiet authority. "Who is that?" Evelyn asked. Nathan glanced toward the photograph and smiled faintly. "We will come back to him." His answer only deepened the mystery. Inside the conference room, a polished walnut table stretched beneath soft afternoon light pouring through oversized windows. Instead of a stack of legal papers, Nathan had arranged 3 objects with remarkable care. A thick cream envelope bearing the same blue wax seal as the one Helen had given her. A weathered brass key attached to a faded leather tag. And a leather binder nearly 4 inches thick. Nathan waited until Evelyn sat before speaking. "Everything your mother did during the last 3 decades was designed to protect one person." Evelyn looked down at her hands. "Me?" He nodded slowly. "Only you." She frowned. "From what?" Nathan leaned back in his chair, choosing each word with unusual precision. "From attention. From expectations. From people who measure human worth by bank accounts instead of character." Evelyn stared at him without speaking. Nothing about the conversation made sense anymore. Margaret had lived in the same modest neighborhood for 25 years. She drove a 12-year-old sedan, volunteered at museums on weekends, and clipped grocery coupons with almost professional dedication. There had never been signs of hidden wealth. Nathan gently slid the cream envelope across the table. Your mother asked that you open this before we discuss anything else. Evelyn carefully broke the wax seal. Inside rested a handwritten letter folded with meticulous care. The elegant handwriting immediately brought tears to her eyes. My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading these words, then I have finally kept every promise I made to your grandfather. I know today feels unbearably heavy, and I wish I could spare you that pain. But I cannot change today. I can only prepare you for tomorrow. You have spent your entire life believing that kindness is ordinary because you grew up surrounded by it. I wanted you to build a life that valued compassion before wealth, integrity before influence, and family before status. If I succeeded, then you are ready to learn the truth. Evelyn's breathing slowed as she continued reading. The next sentence seemed almost impossible. You were never meant to inherit money. You were meant to inherit responsibility. A tear slipped onto the page. Nathan quietly placed a box of tissues beside her, but allowed the silence to remain. After several moments, Evelyn looked up. Nathan, responsibility for what? Instead of answering directly, he reached for the old brass key. Your grandfather, Harrison Harper, established something many years ago that only 3 people have known about until this moment. He placed the key gently into Evelyn's hand. This opens a private vault beneath First National Trust. Inside are documents your family has protected for generations. Evelyn looked from the key to the leather binder. What is inside? Nathan met her eyes with complete sincerity. Everything that proves your mother did not leave behind a modest estate. He slowly turned the binder toward her. Across the first page, embossed in gold lettering, were words that made the room suddenly feel very still. Harper Legacy Holdings. Estimated family assets, $900 million. For several seconds, Evelyn could not move. The number printed across the first page refused to settle into reality. $900 million. It looked less like a financial statement and more like a printing error. She slowly turned another page. There were audited reports from international accounting firms, ownership certificates, investment portfolios, commercial properties in 6 states, technology funds, conservation trusts, and shares in companies whose names appeared on financial news almost every day. Every document carried the same signature line. Harper Legacy Holdings. Nathan quietly watched her absorb one impossible page after another. This cannot be real, Evelyn whispered. My mother lived in a 3-bedroom house. She bought sweaters at department store clearance sales. She refused to replace her old car. Nathan smiled gently. Exactly as she intended. He opened another folder and slid an aged photograph across the table. It showed the same distinguished gentleman from the hallway portrait standing beside a large manufacturing plant sometime during the early 1980s. Your grandfather, Harrison Harper, built one of the country's largest industrial engineering companies before quietly selling it decades ago. Instead of chasing publicity, he transferred nearly everything into private investment partnerships. After his passing, your mother inherited control. Evelyn looked up in disbelief. Then why did we live so normally? Nathan folded his hands together. Because Margaret believed wealth changes the way the world treats children. She wanted teachers to judge your grades, not your last name. She wanted your friends to choose you for your heart, not your inheritance. She wanted any man who entered your life to fall in love with Evelyn Harper, not with a fortune he could never earn himself. Those final words lingered heavily in the room. Evelyn immediately thought of Adrian. When they first met at a neighborhood charity fundraiser 12 years earlier, she had introduced herself as the daughter of a retired college professor. Adrian had admired her simplicity. He often joked that she was refreshingly different from the wealthy socialites who attended his business galas. Ironically, the one thing he claimed to value most had been completely genuine. Nathan reached for another document. Margaret also instructed us never to reveal the truth unless one of 3 conditions occurred. Evelyn listened carefully. The first was her passing. The second was your 35th birthday. The third, he paused, was if your marriage ended before either of the first 2 events. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Her mother had anticipated this possibility, not because she distrusted Adrian from the beginning, but because she understood that character reveals itself over time. Suddenly, another memory resurfaced. Nearly 5 years earlier, Margaret had invited Adrian to help repaint her front porch. He declined, explaining that he had an important golf tournament with investors. After he left, Margaret had quietly finished painting alone. When Evelyn apologized for Adrian's absence, her mother simply smiled and said, "People always tell you what matters most. Usually they do it without speaking." At the time, Evelyn dismissed the comment as another one of her mother's thoughtful observations. Now, every conversation seemed to carry hidden wisdom she had not been ready to understand. Nathan carefully closed the binder. "There is one more matter that cannot wait." He removed a sealed folder marked Board Resolution. "Your family company has operated through a private governing board for years. They have unanimously approved your appointment as executive chair, effective immediately." Evelyn blinked in surprise. "Me? I have never managed a corporation." "No," Nathan agreed. "But you have spent your career teaching financial literacy to struggling families, organizing nonprofit budgets, and leading community programs. You understand responsibility better than many executives understand profit." Before she could respond, his office phone vibrated quietly on the conference table. Nathan glanced at the caller identification, then looked back at Evelyn with an expression that instantly sharpened the atmosphere. "Interesting," he murmured. "One of the directors just informed me that Callaway Urban Development has submitted a proposal requesting a strategic partnership with Harper Legacy Holdings." Evelyn felt her heartbeat quicken. Nathan slowly smiled. "It appears Adrian has absolutely no idea who now controls the company he is hoping will approve the biggest deal of his career." "I do not believe in revenge," Evelyn thought as she looked out across the river through Nathan's office window. Revenge demanded anger, and strangely, anger was beginning to fade. What remained was clarity, the kind that arrived only after every illusion had quietly collapsed. Nathan gave her the remainder of the afternoon to review the family records while a team of senior advisors joined them one by one through secure video conferences. They did not speak to her as though she were an inexperienced heir receiving a lucky inheritance. They spoke to her as the woman her mother had spent decades preparing. Every decision Margaret Harper had made suddenly revealed a hidden purpose. The budgeting lessons during childhood had never been about saving grocery money. The volunteer projects had never been simple acts of kindness. Even the accounting classes Evelyn took at a community college years earlier, despite already earning a degree in education, had been gently encouraged by her mother without explanation. Margaret had never told her where the road ended because she wanted every step to belong to Evelyn rather than to the fortune waiting at the finish line. Late that evening, Nathan escorted her to the private vault beneath First National Trust. The brass key fit perfectly into an old polished lock that looked almost forgotten by time. Inside, rows of secure deposit boxes lined the walls beneath soft lighting. Nathan unlocked one oversized compartment and carefully placed a leather archive case onto the viewing table. "Your grandfather called this the family compass," he said. Evelyn slowly opened the case. Instead of jewelry or gold bars, she found handwritten journals, photographs, business letters, and dozens of neatly organized notebooks spanning nearly 50 years. Resting on top was another envelope addressed in Margaret's elegant handwriting. "My darling girl, if you are reading this, then you already know about the inheritance. But money is the smallest thing inside this room. The true legacy is judgment. Wealth attracts admiration from strangers, expectations from friends, and temptation from those closest to you. Never confuse attention with love. Never confuse admiration with respect. And never allow success to harden your heart." Tears quietly filled Evelyn's eyes as she folded the letter closed. Her mother had left behind instructions, not for becoming richer, but for remaining the same woman she had always been. Nathan opened another folder containing the agenda for the upcoming Harper Legacy Board meeting. "There is one item that requires your immediate attention," he explained. "Callaway Urban Development is requesting approval for a $600 million mixed-use redevelopment project in Chicago. They have spent nearly 2 years preparing this proposal." Evelyn recognized the project immediately. Adrian had spoken about it countless evenings over dinner. He believed securing Harper Legacy as the primary investment partner would elevate his company into an entirely different league. He had celebrated every milestone with quiet confidence, completely unaware that the final approval had always rested with the family whose name he had never heard. Nathan continued, "The board meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday morning. Until then, no public announcement will be made regarding your appointment. Confidentiality is legally required." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. "Does Adrian know who owns Harper Legacy?" Nathan almost smiled. "No. Like many private family investment firms, ownership has remained intentionally anonymous." A long silence settled over the room before Evelyn finally asked the question weighing on her heart. "If I refuse the partnership because of our marriage, would that be fair?" Nathan answered immediately. "Your mother anticipated you would ask exactly that. She instructed the board that every proposal must stand or fall on its merits alone. Personal history cannot become corporate policy." Evelyn closed the folder. That sounded exactly like Margaret. Principle before emotion. Always. Meanwhile, several miles away in his downtown office, Adrian stood before a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city skyline. His executive team congratulated him after receiving preliminary notice that Harper Legacy had agreed to schedule the final presentation. One vice president raised a coffee cup with a confident grin. "Once this deal closes, there will not be another developer in the region that can compete with us." Adrian allowed himself a rare smile. For the first time in months, everything appeared to be falling perfectly into place. He had no idea that the woman he believed he had left behind would soon be waiting at the opposite end of the same boardroom table. Evelyn barely slept during the days leading up to the board meeting. It was not fear that kept her awake. It was responsibility. Every evening after dinner, she sat at the dining table in her mother's quiet house, surrounded by reports, architectural studies, environmental assessments, and financial projections. Nathan had arranged for the entire Harper Legacy executive team to answer her questions, and they quickly discovered something unexpected. Evelyn did not ask how much money a project could earn before asking how many families it would affect. She wanted to know about affordable housing percentages, public parks, neighborhood schools, flood prevention, and long-term community impact. More than once, seasoned executives exchanged impressed glances. Margaret had been right. Compassion could become a remarkable business strategy when paired with discipline. By Monday evening, Evelyn reached her decision. Callaway Urban Development had submitted an impressive proposal, but several sections relied on unrealistic construction timelines and optimistic revenue forecasts. The project deserved another chance, but not in its current form. She made detailed notes beside each recommendation, careful to separate objective analysis from personal history. She refused to allow her marriage to influence a decision involving thousands of future residents. Across the city, Adrian was equally busy preparing for Tuesday morning. His conference room buzzed with confidence as department heads rehearsed presentations and reviewed digital renderings. Harper Legacy has never rejected a proposal this far into negotiations, one senior executive said proudly. "Once we leave that room tomorrow, the financing will practically be a formality." Adrian nodded, though his attention drifted toward the framed family photograph still sitting on a bookshelf in his office. It had been taken during a charity picnic 3 summers earlier. Evelyn stood smiling beneath a large oak tree with one arm around him, while Margaret laughed beside them, holding homemade lemonade. He stared at the picture longer than expected before quietly placing it face down inside a drawer. Some chapters belonged in the past. At least that was what he kept telling himself. Tuesday arrived beneath bright blue skies that contrasted sharply with the storm clouds hanging over both of their private lives. Harper Legacy occupied the top 3 floors of an understated limestone building whose exterior revealed nothing about the enormous influence operating within. There were no flashy signs or giant corporate logos. Quiet confidence had always been the family's preferred language. Nathan greeted Evelyn in the executive lobby where a tailor had delivered a navy maternity suit selected specifically for the occasion. It was elegant without being extravagant, professional without trying to impress anyone. Margaret would have approved. Before entering the boardroom, Nathan handed her one final envelope. "Your mother left one last instruction to be opened immediately before your first meeting." Evelyn unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. There was only one sentence written in familiar handwriting. "Let every person leave your office with their dignity, even if they do not leave with your agreement." Evelyn smiled through moist eyes and carefully folded the note into her portfolio. Inside the boardroom, 12 directors stood as she entered. No applause followed. No dramatic speeches. Only respectful silence. Nathan formally introduced her as executive chair of Harper Legacy Holdings before inviting everyone to take their seats. The agenda moved efficiently through several routine matters until the secretary announced the next presentation. Callaway Urban Development. Nathan looked toward the closed double doors. Please invite the guests inside. Outside the room, Adrian adjusted his tie while his executive team organized presentation materials. One assistant whispered confidently, "This is the meeting that changes everything." Adrian offered a calm smile before pushing open the doors. The room immediately fell silent. 12 directors remained seated around the polished conference table. At the far end, the executive chair's seat faced away from the entrance toward floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Adrian began walking forward, expecting another anonymous investment executive. The chair slowly turned. Time seemed to hesitate. Evelyn looked directly at him with calm, steady eyes. She neither smiled nor frowned. She simply met his astonished expression with quiet composure. "Good morning, Mr. Callaway," she said politely. "Welcome to Harper Legacy Holdings. Please begin your presentation." For a moment, no one in the room spoke. Adrian remained standing near the end of the conference table, his presentation remote still in his hand, while the confidence he had carried into the building quietly disappeared behind an expression he could not hide. He looked from Evelyn to Nathan Brooks, then around the room as if someone might explain that this had to be some elaborate misunderstanding. No one did. Every director simply waited. Business meetings, unlike family arguments, respected silence. Evelyn folded her hands on the polished table. "Whenever you are ready, Mr. Callaway." Her voice carried neither satisfaction nor resentment. It was calm, professional, almost identical to the tone Margaret had always used when teaching difficult students. Adrian slowly cleared his throat. "I was not aware that you were affiliated with Harper Legacy." Nathan answered before Evelyn needed to. Executive Chair Harper assumed her position in accordance with the governing trust several days ago. Adrian absorbed every word without taking his eyes off Evelyn. Pieces of recent events suddenly began fitting together in ways he had never imagined. The unanswered phone calls. The unexpected postponement of the divorce paperwork. Nathan's involvement. Margaret's carefully planned funeral arrangements. None of it had been random. Taking a slow breath, Adrian gathered himself with the discipline that had built his company. He nodded respectfully toward Evelyn. "Congratulations." She acknowledged the remark with a slight inclination of her head. "Thank you. Please continue." The presentation began. Architectural renderings appeared across the large screen as Adrian explained the mixed-use redevelopment project with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed in the vision. Office towers, residential buildings, public green spaces, retail corridors, and transportation improvements were all presented with polished precision. Evelyn listened without interrupting. She took handwritten notes exactly as Margaret had taught her, never relying solely on prepared summaries. Nearly 40 minutes later, Adrian concluded and looked toward the board. "I welcome any questions." They came immediately. One director raised concerns about environmental mitigation. Another questioned projected occupancy rates during the first 5 years. A third challenged financing assumptions tied to changing interest rates. Adrian answered each one thoughtfully. His preparation showed. Finally, Nathan looked toward Evelyn. "Madam Chair." She opened the binder containing her own notes. "Mr. Callaway, your team has clearly invested significant effort into this proposal, and there are many strengths worth recognizing. However, I have several concerns." She calmly outlined each point with remarkable precision. Construction schedules appeared compressed beyond realistic labor availability. Affordable housing commitments fell below regional recommendations. Flood resilience planning relied upon outdated climate projections. Community investment funding ended too early to support long-term neighborhood growth. Adrian listened carefully. None of her observations were personal. Every criticism was supported by independent data, engineering reports, or financial analysis. In fact, several board members quietly nodded as she spoke. When she finished, Adrian looked genuinely surprised. "You reviewed the entire proposal yourself?" Evelyn answered honestly. "Twice." A faint smile crossed Nathan's face. Margaret would have appreciated that answer. Adrian lowered his presentation remote onto the table. Then I also know those recommendations will improve the project. It was the first completely sincere sentence he had spoken to her in months. Evelyn met his eyes without bitterness. That is the goal. The room settled into thoughtful silence until one senior director reached for another folder. Before the board votes, he said, there is one historical disclosure required under company policy. He placed several archived documents in front of Adrian. Your company has unknowingly benefited from Harper Legacy before. Adrian frowned as he examined the papers. Loan guarantees, emergency financing agreements, quiet bridge investments, dates stretching back nearly a decade. Nathan gently explained. 7 years ago, when Callaway Urban Development nearly lost its largest commercial project because a lender withdrew unexpectedly, an anonymous private investor stepped in through a trust. That investor was Margaret Harper. Adrian stared at the signature authorizing the transaction. Margaret's name appeared clearly beneath the trust documentation. Nathan continued softly. Your company survived because she believed protecting her daughter's future mattered more than receiving public credit. She never told Evelyn. She specifically instructed us never to reveal her involvement unless circumstances made the truth necessary. Adrian slowly lowered the documents. Every success he had proudly described as self-made suddenly carried a hidden foundation he had never known existed. He looked across the table at Evelyn, but she seemed just as stunned by the revelation as he was. Neither of them had expected the final lesson Margaret left behind. The board recessed for 45 minutes before returning to deliver its decision. During the break, Evelyn stood alone on the outdoor terrace overlooking the river, letting the cool breeze quiet the whirlwind inside her mind. She was not thinking about $900 million. She was thinking about her mother. Margaret had spent an entire lifetime proving that true wealth was measured by the lives you quietly lifted rather than the attention you attracted. Even now, her final lesson continued to unfold. Nathan stepped outside and joined her without speaking. After a moment, he smiled gently. She would be proud of the way you handled today. Evelyn looked toward the skyline where sunlight reflected across rows of glass towers. I kept wondering what she would have done. Nathan nodded. That is exactly why she knew you were ready. When everyone returned to the boardroom, the atmosphere felt noticeably different. The directors resumed their seats while the corporate secretary recorded the final resolution. Nathan looked toward Adrian first. After careful review, the board has reached a unanimous decision. Adrian remained composed, though the uncertainty in his eyes revealed how much this moment mattered. The proposal is not approved in its current form. His shoulders lowered almost imperceptibly. Before disappointment could fully settle across the room, Nathan continued. However, the board unanimously invites Callaway Urban Development to submit a revised proposal incorporating Executive Chair Harper's recommendations. Upon successful revision, Harper Legacy is prepared to move forward as the lead investment partner. Silence gave way to quiet relief. Adrian understood immediately what that meant. His project had not been rejected. It had been given the opportunity to become better. He slowly stood and faced Evelyn. Thank you for judging the proposal instead of judging me. Evelyn met his gaze calmly. That was my responsibility. There was nothing else to add. Business had reached its conclusion. The following weeks brought changes neither of them could have predicted. Adrian and his executive team worked closely with Harper Legacy analysts to strengthen every aspect of the redevelopment plan. Affordable housing commitments increased. Green infrastructure expanded. Local scholarship funding became a permanent part of the project instead of a temporary initiative. Community leaders who had once opposed the development publicly endorsed the revised design. For the first time in years, Adrian discovered that listening often produced stronger results than insisting he already had the right answers. Meanwhile, Evelyn quietly stepped into her new role without changing the life that had shaped her. She continued teaching financial literacy classes every Thursday evening. She still shopped at the neighborhood grocery store where cashiers knew her by name. She declined magazine interviews and invitations to exclusive social events. When reporters asked why the mysterious new chairwoman of Harper Legacy avoided public attention, she simply smiled and replied that meaningful work rarely needed a spotlight. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Evelyn gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Nathan visited the hospital carrying a small wooden box that had belonged to Margaret. Inside rested a silver compass engraved with a simple message. Character will always point home. Evelyn held the compass in one hand while gently cradling her son with the other. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from gratitude. Some gifts could never be measured in dollars. Several days later, Adrian requested one final meeting at the small neighborhood park where he and Evelyn had first met years earlier during a charity fundraiser. There were no attorneys, no executives, no contracts waiting to be signed. Only two people sitting on opposite ends of the same wooden bench beneath the changing leaves. Adrian looked down for a long time before speaking. I spent years believing success meant building bigger buildings. Your mother spent her life building better people. I understand the difference now, even if I learned it too late. Evelyn listened quietly before answering. People cannot change yesterday. They can only decide what tomorrow deserves. They spoke for nearly an hour, not about reconciliation, but about co-parenting, respect, and the future of their son. When they finally stood to leave, there were no dramatic promises and no impossible endings. Only two adults choosing dignity over resentment. As Evelyn walked away carrying both her child and her mother's compass, she realized Margaret's greatest inheritance had never been the fortune protected for 30 years. It had been the wisdom to recognize that money can open doors, but only character determines which ones are worth walking through.